Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Coach's Corner U. I am introducing us today. My name is Paul and I'm joined by Tony Montgomery. Tony, how are you?
You're pre-introducing us because I'll actually introduce us once it's all over, once I know what we're talking about.
See, I told you I would just kill this intro.
You guys are so organized. I love it.
You were very professional over here.
We've done like 30 something episodes.
And they're all awesome.
Professional.
Thank you. I would, there's times where we talk beforehand and I wish like as soon as you get on the Zoom call, we would just start recording and we would have some of those conversations before. So I don't know. It just feels weird to talk to someone for 5 to 10 minutes and then hit record and then have to introduce it rather than just keep it going. And then I can just introduce it in the very beginning. But now that Paul knows that, then he'll do it the other way next time because he has the next guest up too.
I do. Do I?
Yeah.
I do. Yeah, I do.
You do.
Perfect.
But
how are you?
I'm doing good. No complaints, man. Just trucking along. 2 more weeks of school for this semester. And so really just studying for finals right now next week and then a little bit of a Christmas break. And looking to go up to Ohio for Christmas, which is going to be very cold.
I know that feeling.
Yeah, I bet you do.
And you just turned 51?
Yeah. 36. I just turned 36 yesterday.
Did you have cake?
I had a cookie cake. Yes, I did.
Ooh. Describe it in detail, please.
Well, I'll describe it in a way where I got home and there was already a slice cut out of it and someone ate it because they didn't want to get home. So that's how it was. It was a chocolate chip toffee cookie cake with buttercream icing on top, I believe.
Delicious.
And she was like, "Oh, it freezes really well." I'm like, "It's not going to make it to the freezer. Don't you worry about that."
No. I actually get relentlessly made fun of because I'm really good at freezing desserts and then I forget about them. And I just don't want to eat them because I know I'm like, oh, it'll be delicious, but I'll eat the whole thing. So I just leave it in there. So I had a good dessert weekend.
What you should do if that's the case is before you put it in the freezer, just cut it into segments that you would want to eat. That way you don't have to feel like you have to eat it all. Because you're right. Every time you unthaw it and then refreeze it, it's going to get worse and worse. So you just have to eat it all.
No one likes freezer-burn desserts. It's just sad.
Yeah. So Friday night, Liv had ordered these fancy those fancy bakery cookies that have a bajillion toppings and stuffing in them.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of those, but
these were so good. So I had
typically when
3 of them.
Yeah, when I get those, they're usually really dry because you put so much stuff in them that it actually dries out the cookie. So it's not that great. And then there's just so much shit that you don't even know what you're eating. There's no flavor profile to it.
These were so moist and so good.
Nice.
So shared 3 of those and then had on Sunday score butter tarts. You ever had a butter tart? It's not an American thing.
No, I never had it.
It's almost like a mini pecan pie.
Okay.
They're like cupcake size.
I know what tarts are. Yeah, I've just never heard them called scored butter tarts. Is that what you called them?
They were score the chocolate bar mixed in with the butter tart.
Okay, so it's a tart still.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, we're on the same page.
Then I had apple crisp.
Apple crisp.
Delicious.
Cereal?
No. Apple crisp.
Oh, apple crisp. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was, I don't have to make weight. So.
Well, you might. Yeah, you don't want to have to make weight to 242.
No. I still have 5 pounds to go.
Oh, perfect. And is Olivia having to make weight for her meet?
Well, she's gonna compete at 165, but she's sitting around 160, 161.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
So there's no stress there. Her training's going so good too.
Oh, perfect. Have you decided on whether or not you're gonna do it?
I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna be ready, especially after this week. Actually, it was after Dani and I talked earlier, last week. I made a couple changes to the way I'm organizing my squat and deadlift workouts. So instead of doing all of my squat movements on one day, I split them back up. So I'll squat and then deadlift, and then I'll deadlift and then squat. And my knee felt better after my squat workout than it did before, simply just by reducing the volume and just not doing that secondary movement.
Yeah.
And yesterday I had no pain. So it was like almost immediate. And strength is definitely there. So why not? Have at her.
Well, I have
Yeah.
so many ideas about why you're having pain beyond a certain volume threshold. And my nerdy brain, we started talking about it a little bit the other day. This is like the third time I've seen you in a week, and it makes me really,
I know,
really
it's great.
like it's fantastic.
Yeah.
I have so many ideas. And my nerd brain, after we got off the call the other day, was like, gosh, like so many possibilities. But
Yeah, but for once, this isn't about me, and I'm not going to make it about me. This is about you. So tell us about how Dani's doing.
no, but I really like talking about other people. I mean, this is where my nerd brain actually gets super excited. It's problem solving.
Pretend you're a third party. Talk about yourself in the third person.
Well, I mean, we started talking about cookies and desserts, and so that's kind of my first.
Great segue.
It's a great segue. No, but really, it was awesome getting to talk to you about your training. And I think if you can solve your problem, that's fantastic. But it'd be super fun to be able to maybe peel through a couple of those layers at some point with you. Maybe not when you're like in prep, but you know.
Hey, I'm not going anywhere, so you know where to find me. But so you're competing this weekend for the first time in how long?
About 4 years, actually. It's been a minute. Yeah.
But you've been busy.
I have been busy. So I had a pretty big injury right after my last meet, and then I had some other medical issues that messed up my nervous system pretty substantially for a while, and really only gotten back into training for about 2 years now. But in that time, I've been able to compete in my first bodybuilding show and then turn pro my second, which was awesome. And now I'm getting back on the powerlifting platform for the first time in a minute next weekend. So pretty excited about that.
I love how before the podcast we were talking about like, oh yeah, I loved when I started bodybuilding. I was a novice. It was great to have little wins every time. Then I turned pro in my second show, and
yeah, it's been.
You dove in though.
What's that?
You dove in head first.
Yeah, it's been kind of a trip, actually, just kind of taking the skill set of being a therapist and lateralizing that into so many different avenues. And I think dealing with the injury, the adductor tendon, and trying to prep for a show and also wanting to regain strength has really kind of tested my knowledge in a lot of different ways. And just to see those kind of come together in a way that's been really productive. And, you know, we were talking about expectation management at the very start before we even hit the, play button or record button. And I think that's trying to roll all those three things into one big ball of where do I want to go with, my competitions has really removed a lot of the expectation, because it's just kind of been like, well, let's see what happens when we try to do all these things at once.
So something that I struggle with sometimes, I think Tony does it pretty well, but it's when coaching yourself, or when, having yourself as that therapist, trainer, overseer, maintaining objectivity. How do you maintain objectivity with yourself?
You wrote something on Instagram the other day that really, really resonated with me, which was coming back to the data. And ultimately, I think that's kind of what it comes back to, and just recognizing that if you have, kind of a spectrum or a bell curve of performance, as long as most of your sessions are kind of residing somewhere within that bell curve, and you're accumulating, session after session within that expected range, and you're not getting a ton of outliers, I think it's a little bit easier to kind of stay the course. I don't know if that helps or if that kind of answers the question.
Yeah, I wrote that kind of as a message to myself, because I get very emotionally driven in training. It's like the one area, like I have a lot of feelings in general, but training is the one area of my life where I have been quite poor at separating the data from my emotion. So I'm always curious when people do that very well, if they have any, specific strategies, or, I know your husband, Dave, is an athlete and a coach. So like having him to kind of bounce ideas off of whenever you can, I'm sure helps. But like, what is it other than, the data within the moment? How do you kind of refocus yourself?
I think there are a lot of directions to go with that. And I'd be really interested to hear if you've been successful in doing this, and if so, what you've done. But I think for me, number one, I came from a place where not long ago, I was like trying to figure out how to walk again. So I think being in that dark of a place, I hate to say it, but like, you're just grateful for every session, like no matter how bad it is, right? But then I also think that I'm pretty emotional about my training too. It's something I really lost my identity in, and I still struggle with it, to be honest. I always feel like I have to like prove something, which is dumb, but whatever. I think that desire to want to do well and be emotional about your training can also be what allows you to step back, where if you really want to do well at something and you want to invest in your future self, and this is probably something you've talked with your athletes about too, if you are emotionally invested in your training, and you want to do well for your future self, and you want to show up as the best version of yourself from a performance as well as psychological perspective, I think that sometimes encourages that shift into more objective data.
Yeah, it's funny because similar to what you said about having the injury and then just feeling grateful. It was actually this last, I would say, off season into prep for that meet in November that I did, where I was like, hey, wait a second, I'm pain free right now, and it feels so good. And if I had a bad session, I had a session where things just felt off, I literally had no problem at all backing off and being like, okay, this isn't what I need to be doing today. This is going to set me back. I need to do something different, or just omit the session entirely. Because I was like, I love the way I'm feeling. I'm grateful for this pain-free feeling. I'm not going to do anything to jeopardize it. And I think like, it's almost like you have to look at yourself as this like third party. So like kind of pull your brain out of your body and look at it as like, okay, like if this was your athlete, how would you advise them to move forward? Whereas before I was like, oh, fuck this, I'm going to beat my head against the wall because this session, if I don't complete this session, I'm not going to hit the numbers next week. And then in the meet, nothing will happen. Well, I know objectively that that's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. But in the moment, that seems like the best idea possible. Tony, like you do this really well, I feel like how do you kind of talk yourself down? Because I know that when you do something, you're 100% invested in it. Obviously with the running and everything like that, that shows that. But how do you pull back?
I mean, in terms of like, if there's anything nagging or anything like that, being able to auto-regulate your plan for the day, right? Understanding what the intent of the training is, and maybe today is not the day to get that, to objectively get that. Understanding that by pushing that back and being fully recovered is going to allow you to have the best outcome possible. And if you're truly driven by the outcome, then it should be easy to make those choices, right? If you're not so interested in your program more so than you are in the outcome, then you're not going to be so ego driven to have to perform it a certain way, right? So that allows you the freedom to continuously try to figure out what's going on and circle back to the issues, right? So it could be that you're doing too much volume, so your knee starts to bother you. And it's like, okay, well, how can I still get good training in without my knee being the issue? And it's like, for me, if my knee starts to bother me when I'm doing jiu-jitsu or running, it's like, okay, well, let me stop the weight bearing stuff because that's probably what's causing the knee issue, but I still want to get cardio working. So let me go to a bike, right? And it's the same thing with lifting. If I'm doing a lift and I know I should be hitting this number based on the numbers that I've hit in the past and I don't, what's the reason for that? Was it poor sleep? Was it high stress? Was it too much volume the week before? And then auto-regulating that so that the next week I don't continue to compound those issues, right? Because it's not all of a sudden going to just magically, you're going to get weak and it's never going to come back. There's something you did within the paradigm of that week or 4 days or 5 days leading into that session that caused this issue to flare up. And it could be something as silly as like you just slept in a bad position, or you woke up poorly or you got in a fight or anything like that, being able to take that step back and be like, okay, well, stress is high. I know that it's high. So what does that mean? That probably means going into this session, instead of doing 4 sets of squat, I'm already going into it 2 sets deep due to the high amount of stress. So that means my volume is going to have to come down tremendously in order for me to not dig a deeper hole. And I think that just comes with like maturity and understanding your body and auto-regulating. And that's why I enjoy coaching myself, because I've made those mistakes enough times to now I can pull back and do those things. When you rely heavily on a coach to make those choices for you, then when you're left to your own devices, you haven't gone through those same mistakes. As much as you say, I communicate with my coach all the time and we auto-regulate and he listens to me or she listens to me and I listen to her, you're not fully taking control of it. You're still giving some of that to that coach, and you're not ever going to build that confidence to make those choices, because the coach ultimately does in the end. So I always think, like, if you can coach yourself through things and you can continue to look for better answers to the questions, then you're going to come out the other end much better as an athlete. And then that maturity is going to allow you to continue to divulge into different aspects of your training to look a little bit deeper, so that you don't continue to have those same perpetuating issues time and time again.
I love that you mentioned the word maturity, because as you're sitting here talking, so much of what I was thinking was that I think a lot of this comes with time, practice. And again, I think being able to look objectively at data is one of the biggest markers of an athlete's maturity. And I think just the opportunity to practice, it's just like any other skill, right? Like, you need to practice it before it becomes a habit, and those actions become habits. And so having the opportunity to go through and look at the data, I think, is one way that actually allows you to step into that kind of third party view.
Now, Danny, in your work doing, like, I know you have a very hybrid model of training, and you work with a lot of really complex cases because of your education and experience as a PT. How much of your actual practice and client work centers around trying to find these little nuanced predictors and lifestyle variables?
Help me understand a little bit more about what you mean with like the nuanced predictors. And
so like we're talking about, okay, my stress levels are this, this is how I'm sleeping, this is how my work schedule is, this is how my training's been going up to this point, this is the issue that I'm having, these are my past issues. Like, I know, in speaking with you and working with you informally, you're like a fucking detective.
That's kind of you. I think it's important, but you guys probably see this with your athletes as well, where if there's something like pain going on, our nervous systems are incredibly sensitive to pain and all the other life stressors. And I mentioned pain because, again, that's where a lot of my clients live. Not all of them, but some of them, quite a few. I think you guys both, in working with athletes and coaching, as long as you have, recognized that as soon as pain is in the mix, all those other variables, if you were to imagine like some sort of a switchboard that has a bunch of dials on it, those switches become a lot more sensitive to small changes.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
That's one of the things that I shifted a lot of my coaching towards lately, is more along the lines of, like, when you look at the research on pain and what it can do, how it can downregulate force production, right? If you have an athlete constantly chasing, say, hypertrophy, right? And hypertrophy may not lend itself to putting you in the most morphologically like advantageous positions, right? You have to challenge the muscles in certain ways, and that can put a lot of torque on your elbows and shoulders. And by chasing that, you're also chasing pain components, because there's maybe not a lot of freedom of movement with fixed machines and things along that nature, right? So if you're constantly pushing that variable and you're in constant pain because of it, then you're not able to fully showcase your strength when it comes to the main movements. So what I've done a lot recently is just really focusing on the main movements, making sure there's no pain there. And then all the accessories and everything else is focused on more rehabilitative stuff, stability type stuff. And I could care less about going after hypertrophy, because I found that over the years, when you look at these athletes and you look at the strongest people in the world, they're in their weight classes and they're pretty much fixed in their weight classes. So if hypertrophy was driving strength, then you would see them continuously progressing up in weight classes and getting stronger, but you don't ever see that, right? The guys that are 308, they stay 308 for their entire career. Maybe they put on a couple pounds of muscle here and there, but that doesn't necessarily project to their strength being as high as it is. So, I could care less about the hypertrophy side of things. If they can stay pain-free, then I know that they're going to be able to put as much force production and as much effort into those main movements as possible. And then that's when you actually get that neural drive, that neural connection to be a stronger athlete.
Man, there are so many layers, and just hearing you talk, my brain thought of like 16 things that could be extrapolated from what you just mentioned. And I think there's a big difference between, when we talk about an athlete, I think between the three of us, we coach so many different kinds of athletes, right? For the three of us to sit down and talk about an athlete and their goals, we'd have to actually specify what it is they're working towards. But I do think that in general, I don't think there's any reason, even in, hypertrophy-based movements, that and I'm not saying that this is what you were going towards, but there should not be pain, whether it's related to, machine or apparatus setup or anything like that. I truly think that, good coaching, and especially coming from a powerlifting background where all three of us, to one degree or another, are taught tension. We're taught to be stiff. We're taught not to move. I mean, we're taught to really create as much rigidity as we can. And if we contrast that to so many other types of training, whether it's, running or riding or swimming for you, Tony, or for you, Paul, I feel like you do such a great job of including some sort of movement variability. Even within that movement variability, oftentimes we're still reverting back to so many of the patterns that we've very likely adopted with our powerlifting background. And very often when I work with an athlete who comes from a strength sport background, whether it's strongman, Highland Games, powerlifting, and they want to transition to something like bodybuilding, or they're like, I don't want to compete. I just want to be able to put on some size. So much of what often I work on with that person is, how are you controlling your tension and where? Because very often we don't recognize the baseline neurological levels that we operate within, where if we're going to think about a pendulum of absolutely no tension whatsoever, totally loosey-goosey, versus as rigid as we can get under a bar, so many of us throughout certain regions of our body kind of live in a very small section of that. And I think one thing that you both have done really well is expand that region. And that's probably why you've both succeeded to the degree that you have and been able to lateralize that into working with your clients as well.
Yeah, I think I've done it better in the past, but the inclusion of movement variability for me has always been just something I found to be important. I mean, my clients they'll balk at me when I say, hey, like, you might want to hop on an Airdyne and do some conditioning. They're like, oh, well, I'm off season, I should be trying to get in shape. I was like, yeah, well, you're really fat and you can't walk up a flight of stairs without feeling winded. So I think if we get your engine up, I think you'll be able to do a little bit more work in your training and recover a little bit better. Oh, okay, that makes sense. And then they trudge over to the Airdyne. Or, introducing different modalities, kettlebells, mace swings, things that get them moving laterally. Different types of core exercise, whether we're talking about static holds, walking, different types of rotational planes. I think that has a lot of place within a training plan. And I think we get stuck moving in this like straight up and down.
Very sagittalized, yes.
Right. And yeah, go ahead. Oh, I was going to say, we forget that all movements involve torque, and torque is rotational. So if we're talking about hip stability, we're talking about creating torque about the hip. We're talking about creating torque within the ankle and the foot. We're talking about, creating torque through the shoulders while we're bench pressing. And if we're only training in the sagittal plane, we're never going to truly train that type of stability component. And that's something I've had to learn the hard way. Like, I mean, I actually if you want to talk about my biggest failure as a strength coach in my entire career, the thing I regret the most, I had a kid. He was a football player at Queen's University up here in Canada. He was in his graduating class when I was working at the school. Recovered from an ACL. I prepped him for the draft. He didn't get drafted. We prepped him for some pro days. He ended up like getting a bunch of offers and signing. He had a couple catches and a touchdown in his first season, and we were still working together. And then he tore his ACL for the second time. And I looked through his program and I was like, what did I do wrong? Because it was a non-contact ACL. And I looked through his program, and for the last like 3 months before that injury, there's not a single rotational drill or lateral drill in it. And I was like, oh. And I know like you can't like place causality there, but that one thing showed me, I'm like, okay, you can't do that ever again. But yeah, movement variability is something I don't think people talk too much about, especially in powerlifting.
I mean,
forget too that even if we look at a sagittally based movement, even within the ball and socket joint, if you think about the arthrokinematics, meaning like how does the ball move within the socket, there's going to be some degree of roll and glide and spin that has to occur to achieve full range of motion. And that is rotation. That is torque.
Yeah, I mean, I understand with the athlete-centered approach, right, to doing that with powerlifting. You know, I haven't found that to necessarily be as valuable, right? The lateral movements, the rotational stuff, I haven't really seen that to be something that, if neglected in a program, will cause deleterious effects downstream. I've seen that if you can get movement efficiency and technique down within movement patterns, you can resolve a lot of those issues. And to me, it's just, if you can focus on that, right, and build stability through that plane of movement pattern, then you're going to start to nip a lot of the issues in the bud. I think it's when people start to chase these other dynamics, that's when a lot of the variability can cause issues as well, right? Because if you have movement variability for that athlete, you're also introducing movements that maybe that athlete is not going to be prepared for, right, based on whatever history they have. And then you have all these variabilities that they're facing. They're having a hard time overcoming those. And then you have them under a bar trying to overcome that at the same time, right? So you're sending mixed signals to what their body can recover from, where fatigue's coming from, what stability is. And to me, I just haven't found that to be very useful in terms of powerlifting, right? I think of it as like, if you teach them proper mechanics, proper bracing, proper efficiency of movement, you don't really need to add those other things in unless they present themselves within movement deficiencies based on what you're seeing. But to be like, okay, we just did a meet, we did a lot of squatting, benching, and deadlifting. Now we need to do some rotational stuff. We need to do some side lunges. We need to do some GPP work. To me, that just doesn't ever make sense, right? Unless there's something that tells you that that person needs to do it, right? I think so many coaches try to throw in this toolbox full of stuff that they have, that they've seen other strength coaches use with real athletes that are doing lateral movements, deceleration type stuff, things along that nature. And they're like, oh, let me throw this in for a power lifter. And then they have this 2-month GPP phase that doesn't do shit for them as far as getting them stronger. And they usually end up more injured and more broken down. Like I had a client of mine who's like, yeah, I want to get into some type of conditioning and some type of running type stuff. And I was like, okay, well, this is what you need to do. You need to go get your gait analyzed. You need to make sure that you have proper footing, proper shoe stuff, make sure you have proper gating. Like, oh, I don't know if I want to do all that. I was like, well, that's what it is, right? When you're doing all these extra things, there has to be some type of analysis to it. Like I look at someone like Phil DeRue, who does a lot of analyzing with his athletes, not so much strength training, but he's constantly analyzing their movements. And so many strength coaches are like, oh, we're going to put in the sagittal plane movement. We're going to put in this lateral plane movement. And they're like, you haven't even analyzed that person's movement or gait pattern or anything. How can you add this stuff in there? Right. It's just so uncreative. They're trying to be creative and in such an uncreative way that they're actually not doing things that are going to benefit their athlete. And I mean, you guys may disagree with that, but that's just what I've seen over the years.
Well, there's a few points there that jump out. Number one, creativity is intelligent problem solving. If you're creating problems, that's not creative,
Right.
right? Like if you're looking at something that's not broken and you're trying to be creative, that's not creative. That's you just throwing shit at a wall.
Yeah, but I think that's what happens though. It's like,
I totally agree with you that that's what
Yeah.
happens. What I'm coming at this from is that I totally agree with you that, these 2-month-long GPP phases, movement for the sake of movement, we always have to be analyzing movement quality. We always have to be analyzing how efficient is this person moving. If we feel that, when we look at a person and we look at the competition movements, very rarely will you have a person that is morphologically suited to perform those 3 movements. They might be suited to one more than the other, and so on and so forth. And that's, to me, where we see the differentiations in performance outcomes. Like we have these cues or these ranges of what should be appropriate or efficient, but that's going to look different for every person, which is going to place overload on different joints for every person. So for me, implementing those more rotational drills or more the drills more suited to that athlete's areas of breakdown, that's where that comes from. It doesn't come from adding in additional volume. It doesn't come from adding in additional work. It is in place of the other stuff we might be doing. And then obviously that would gear the program more towards a general physical preparedness, but we're still performing the barbell lifts. Then as we transition more into a prep, specificity will come up. Those movements will taper off as we increase the stress allocation for those main movements. And then we get back into a much more quote unquote, powerlifting style of program. What I have found is that implementing those movements on a concurrent basis just allows us to push those main movements harder and keep us more available for performance. That's it. If you're more available.
Yeah, I agree with both of you guys, because I think that you're right. Like if you're going to change something, there has to be a purpose behind it. And in my opinion, it needs to be periodized appropriately. That doesn't necessarily mean it has to be within a competition or within an off season, but whatever it is that you're implementing needs to fit with the current goals for the athlete, short-term and long-term. I'm just going to add, kind of a third point of view here, because again, I talk to people who are either in pain or have very, very, very weird movement patterns, or a history of pain that's resolved, but you can tell there's just still something off. And I do think that there's some stuff that we can't see. And at some point, and Paul, do you mind if I just use you as an example? So with your history of knee pain, your bracing looks really good, right? You work a lot on your hip mobility. But one thing that, and this is actually very similar to another client that I have right now, history of long-standing glute pain. She'd been working with another therapist for, a couple of years and not seen much progress. Bracing strategy looked great externally, but when we looked at her ability to control hip rotation, meaning through the pelvic floor, through specific ranges of motion, and keep in mind some of the deeper rotators are going to change their role as you approach different degrees of hip flexion, aka what you go through in your squat, changed. Now, did it modify her bracing strategy to where she wasn't getting the power production she needed out of the hole and ended up causing some nerve irritation? Absolutely. But externally, did she look good? Sure. And so I think that if you're working with someone who, whether they're in pain or they're not, I think as coaches, one of the best things we can do is continually ask the question. And I don't think we can ever assume to know everything that's going on.
Yeah. I mean, definitely good points. And, I feel like if you're able to work with a client hands-on, you can get away with a little bit more variability. But if you're an online coach, I very much follow like the keep it simple as much as possible approach, right? So if I want an athlete to work on some type of anti-rotation, movement, I got to think to myself, well, if I give them this movement, are they actually going to perform it the way I want them to? Or are they going to do some bullshit and it's not going to look? And then how do I really want to spend 6 weeks of going back and forth communication to get this one thing dialed in perfectly when there's like other remedial things that I can have them do that will elicit the same benefit, right? So that's what I like when I'm picking exercises and accessories. I'm like, fuck, if I can't find a video that exactly displays this, then I need to figure out some other way or some different exercise, right? Because if you tell someone, I want you to do a horizontal pull movement, right? Because a bigger back is a stronger back. If you believe that bullshit, awesome. But you tell someone that and they're like, I'm going to choose a barbell row. And it's like, okay, I wasn't very specific with what I wanted to do, but that barbell row doesn't do shit for your back, fatigues your lower back, and it's going to create more fatigue than anything. And you're not bracing properly and you're not doing, so it's like, how can I minimize that as much as possible? It's like, well, if I tell you to do a horizontal pull with some type of chest support so that I know that you're bracing into that, and I know that that pull is not going to put a lot of attack, then that's a proper exercise selection, right? But I think then you have to think like, okay, well, do I want them to work their lats? Do I want them to work their rhomboids? Do I want them to work their traps? Then I have to tell this person where they need their elbows to be. And it's like, fuck, right. Like that's just so much stuff to do. And that person is never going to do it accurately. So why am I going to continue to give them shit that I would do hands-on perfectly fine? But from an online perspective, it just seems to muddy the water so much more. And I think that by them constantly like inappropriately doing these exercises that you give them, that in your mind this is going to work and in their mind it's going to work, but it's so improperly performed that it's going to end up fucking them up. It's like, I just stick to the basics, like, you know, let's squat, bench, and deadlift as much as we can, and then we'll find exercises that don't fuck you up to allow you to squat, bench, and deadlift more.
This has been the hardest part. So I've transitioned to fully remote. I don't do any in person anymore. And you guys know enough of my background. We're like, God, like, 8 years ago, I was like talking about the diaphragm and everyone was like, why are you talking about the diaphragm? And now it's all we have to talk about. What's that?
So nobody cares about your breathing, Dani.
I know, right? No, it's not important at all. It's not like, pressure management is important or anything. But I think that as coaches too, this is where, like, I hate to say that we can do better. And this is also where I run into problems because I let my time be eaten up by trying to provide people all of those details. But I think this is where as coaches, we really need to continue to grow in our ability to educate and grow in our ability to explain the purpose of what's going on for people and recognize that it means that someone's probably going to jack up a movement a couple of times. But if they're truly invested in getting better, not only is it important for them to learn the difference between, okay, like if you're going to do a barbell row, one should actually be able to maintain position, keep a strong hinge, and don't just, leverage the gosh darn thing up with your erectors. But I do think that as coaches, how we grow as coaches becomes super important in how we communicate these goals, the intent, and the reason for why these building blocks are in place for athletes. And it's, Tony, I totally resonate with you because I'm just sitting here and I'm like, hallelujah. Like, because people don't realize that for us as coaches to give them all those tools and to develop the toolbox on our end to be able to hand that off to them there are more questions and there's more of a Pandora's box that we're getting into than I think people really realize. And at the same time, as coaching becomes more available, especially with COVID and now everyone's going remote and online, for us to be great coaches, I think we need to find a way to get those pieces in place. Maybe that's ambitious. I don't know, but
well, it's not that it's ambitious. It's just that from a business perspective, the niche population that we've chosen to work with aren't willing to pay for that ambition. If you're working with an NFL group, if you're working with guys that are going to pay you, you have a retention of $2,500 a month, then yeah, that ambition is warranted, right? But is it necessary is the way I look at it. And to me, when you're dealing with powerlifters and strength athletes, I don't think it's that necessary. I don't think it's that necessary to be so ambitious in that aspect of things when simplicity is the sport. It's the name of the game, right? We've chosen the easiest sport to coach and strength train and program for. It's like, how do you become the laziest coach in the world? Just become a powerlifting coach. You only have to focus on 3 things, or a weightlifting coach. We only have to focus on 2 things, right? It's like, I don't know. I just don't feel like there should be, I just don't think that stuff's necessary. And the less that I focus on those things, the better my athletes become, the less injured they get. And that's the way, I mean, Paul has his reasoning for doing it. And he has his data that shows like, hey, if I put this stuff in, my athletes get better. And I have the same thing. So there's different ways of looking at it. But for me, it's like simplicity is king, you know? And if I have something that's not going to be simple, I better have a very in-depth video for that person to give them. And then it's like, do I really want to spend hours of my day doing videos for people and still charge them what they're willing to pay? It's like, from a business perspective, it makes you sound like you're a shittier coach, but you got to be paid for your time, right? So if you're constantly doing new videos for every client that you have and you're spending, say, 10 hours a week with that client, are you getting paid for that 10 hours a week, what you should be getting paid? Are you getting paid that $100 an hour that most personal trainers charge, of between 100 and 2? The answer is going to be no, right? But you're giving them personal training value. And it's like, if I can find exercises and still make progress without having to do that, the athlete's going to be happy because they're still doing things. And I'm going to be happy because my time is not being devalued.
Absolutely. And I think it's a question of knowing when. Like I love low-hanging fruit. If there's low-hanging fruit and someone's going to progress from it, again, like equipping someone with the basics, there's a reason the basics have been popular for so long. They're effective. But I think that just knowing when simplicity is the answer, and I would say more often than not, I'd say 80% of the time or greater, probably 85.
I was going to say, like, when you say low-hanging fruit, like that's the majority of what we deal with, right?
100%. Yeah. And it's great. I mean, at that point, we're problem solving and we're giving someone something that is going to help them be better with, like you said, Tony, feeling like we're not devaluing our own time. But then my question to you both is, when you have that 15%, how do you handle it? Because you're both two of, I truly believe, the smartest coaches in the industry right now in multiple ways.
Jeez, thank you.
She's the best. Need to keep her around.
Yes.
I love you guys. I love what you do. So when you have that 15%, and maybe I'm asking this because I get that weird 15% the basics don't work
for sure.
How do you handle that then? Is it the kind of thing where you peel off a layer at a time and you just kind of say, okay, like this is probably going to be a 6-month process of really improving this? Or, I mean, there's the expectation management, there's the actual skill set. How do you approach that?
So for me, like I have a few clients right now that like definitely jump out to me as like what you're talking about. So returning to what we were talking about before of like these exercise variability and stuff like that. Tony, we talked about it with Nick when he was on the podcast of introducing movement constraints that do the coaching for you. So if you want to improve someone's bracing in a split squat, just throw them in a zercher. It does it for you automatically. They can't anterior tilt, boom, problem solved. I think that's creativity, that problem solving within a larger framework of keeping it simple while accomplishing a more challenging teaching task. So to me, that's where it comes down to, is like, how creative can I be in achieving a movement output or some type of objective thing that I'm looking for from this athlete that they can't do, that they've identified that causes them pain. And doing it in a way where it's very easy for them to execute. I had a client come to me, I think it's been about 4 or 5 months now. She was with another coach, kept getting repeatedly injured to the point where she had a labrum tear in her hip, was told, you'll never squat or deadlift again. And I was like, okay, well, you're probably not going to be able to squat or deadlift heavy for a little bit. Let's try and teach you how to brace, teach you how to move through space, modify your patterns a little bit. So we brought her stance in, we switched her from sumo to conventional. We did a bunch of different things that are, like you said, low-hanging fruit. And I think these things get overlooked so much when we talk about pain manifestation, is maybe the person just isn't moving in a way that's advantageous for them. That's a really easy fix and doesn't require any sort of like expensive or fancy coaching, right? Maybe you just need to bring your feet a little closer together and your hips won't hurt. Boom, your hips don't hurt. Sweet, let's squat. Or, maybe it's, you can do some squatting, but not a lot. Okay, we still want to train your legs. Can you do a hack squat? Can you do a leg press? Can we put you in different positions that allow you to train that movement pattern without overloading the tissue that might be exacerbating your pain? Then we have to look at pain as a multifactorial variable, right? It's going to be exacerbated by stress. Poor sleep is going to make it worse. The more we get into our heads that these movements cause pain, the more pain they will cause. So approaching it from a cognitive behavioral therapy standpoint of, hey, we're going to put you in these positions. We're just going to change the constraints of these positions. And oh, look, your high bar squat hurts, but your front squat doesn't. Great, let's just front squat. And then a couple weeks down the line, hey, let's try high bar again. Oh, it doesn't hurt. Great. Right. So having a lot of tools in your toolbox to pull from, I think makes this process a lot simpler.
Mhm.
And having the ability to creatively problem solve and look at it as this multifactorial soup rather than a puzzle. Like I really think that we need to get it out of our heads that every case manifests itself the same way. Because so many times you might have this framework of how you think it's going to work out. Boom, they had a pain flare up for no reason. Well, there's a reason. You just don't know what it is. And I'm totally okay telling the athlete, hey, I don't know why you had this flare up, but 2 weeks ago we were training pain-free, so let's regress. And then they get discouraged. So how are you going to deal psychologically with that client who gets discouraged? Is it going to be more time intensive to work with a client like that than a straightforward client who has no pain and is progressing linearly? Absolutely, it's going to take more time. But I don't know. I like the problem solving. I think it's fun.
So for me, when it comes to that 15%, I would outsource it, because you're hiring me as your strength coach, right? When in the history of any other sport does a person go to their strength coach for issues like that? Never. They go to an athletic trainer who works alongside their strength coach. So I've had several clients who will get an athletic trainer or a personal or a PT, and they would send me their info to me. We would talk through and coordinate a plan, but that person is the one that's doing the hands-on stuff. That person, because it's like, I'm not going to pretend that I can do a better job than someone who's going to be there and do the hands-on stuff. And that's just not what I do. It's not what I do for a living. I'm not going to be that coach, that strength coach that puts up all these mobility drills and all these physical therapy drills and pretends that they can fix you like these assholes do, because they can't. And it's just exasperating the problem, because then these kids hire you and they're like, oh, well, this coach, he fixes people. I'm like, no, he doesn't. He puts up bullshit Instagram videos and doesn't fix anyone, because trust me, I know I've worked with 10 of his clients who quit because they keep getting injured because he doesn't know what he's talking about. Right. So it's like, that's the things that drive. It's like that 15%. Let's find a good athletic trainer. Let's find a good physical therapist. Send me their information, and I'm willing to coordinate and spend time doing that. But I'm not going to pretend that I can be like, oh, you have adductor pain when you do this, and then if you do that, then this flares up. And it's like, yeah, guess what? There's somebody out there that's fucking way smarter than me that can figure this out, right? I can't do I'm not going to set up a Zoom assessment and pretend that I'm going to be able to diet. Like it's like,
no, we're going to manipulate the training.
Yeah.
Right. And if that training manipulation doesn't work, we're sending them to Danny.
It's like, what? Yeah. It's like, what?
Because honestly, like manipulating the training is one of the biggest things that I do. And people think that like, so my big thing, if someone's going to ask me, Danny, what do you do? I'd say, I would let your training be your PT. That's what I do. That's what I'm really good at. I think I'm honestly one of the best people out there that does that, period, full stop. And it's come through trial by fire of my own.
Yeah, right.
But a lot of times people come in and like, I've got this rotator cuff tear and I can't do this, that, and the other. And, I was working with this PT and now I don't know what to do. And I'm like, well, how about we just train? And how about we just, gather some data for a couple of weeks and see where we go from there. And almost always, you get on social media and people are posting all these like sexy, glamorous exercises and trying to use these really big words. And I'm
so
like,
stupid.
And can we not alienate people by making them feel dumb because we use big words? Can we quit doing that, please? But very often I just start someone really simple and just providing a simple plan that they know they can follow and execute. It takes the whole element of chaos, totally chucks it out the window. And I think that as soon as chaos is gone, people tend to do really, really well. It allows the narrative to be controlled. It allows you as a coach, whether or not you're dealing with pain, it allows you as a coach to see the bigger picture. And people just tend to communicate a lot better with someone that kind of comes in with a really calm, like, hey, how things go? You doing okay? Everything all right? A lot easier to communicate at that point.
Yeah. I mean, as a coach, right, as a strength coach, our job is to see like what variables did we introduce as coaches that could have caused this issue. All right, well, then that's kind of the issue that I had with Paul's statement about bringing in all these variables. Like, you start adding in this extra shit, right? How do you know what's actually causing the problem if there is a problem? And then say you add in these exercises and something flares up, what do you know to pull back on, right? So it's like, let's not, because that happens a lot too, right? People will get these new mesocycles and it's like, here's a whole new set of exercises, like, and then something flares up, you're like, I don't know what the fuck it is, right? So it's like, can we simplify the programming and can we regress the volume down so that that person's like, what bothers you? Oh, this exercise bothers me. Okay, well, this exercise, we're trying to develop your quads. So now let's find an exercise that doesn't bother your knee, but still gets the same quad development. And then we just find that exercise, right? We stay away from pain. That way there's not pain elicited whenever they do their movements. And it's just that simple. And if I can't fix it by doing that, then it's out of my hands. We need to find an athletic trainer, physical therapist, because it's going to be a lot deeper than exercise selection. And for some reason, people don't want to wrap their heads around that, right? But you go to any professional sports team and it's a collaborative effort of like, hey, you got an injury, you know, like Paul said, if it's a non-contact injury, you look at the strength coach, be like, hey, what are we doing to cause some of these injuries? If it's a contact injury, then it's like, hey, this is what the PT is saying. Now let's work within these paradigms of injury management as a strength coach. And that's really all you can do as a coach. If I'm going to tell an athlete like, okay, we're going to fix you. I got this. It's like, no, I'm talking out my ass because there's no way. It's just not going to happen.
I remember when you know, that athlete that I referenced with the labrum tear came to me, the first thing I said was like, I'm not making you any promises.
Yeah.
I will do my best to manipulate your training in a way that hopefully can get you working out and working hard, pain-free. And then we can see if we can progress. But I'm not a doctor. And if a doctor told you that you're never going to squat or deadlift again,
yeah,
I'm not going to say they're wrong.
Let's set some really low expectations.
Yeah, exactly. Expectation management, which we talked about earlier.
Yeah. And I think as a coach, right, that's what happens is they get into all these fancy, like we talked about with Nick, they get onto all these fancy progression schemes and then the athlete gets injured. Then you're constantly regressing your athlete because you as a coach can't actually program properly because you think that it's important to do X, Y, and Z because that's what the trend is now. And then you fucked your athlete up and now you have to regress them instead of just starting them in the most regressed patterns possible. Right. And then from there, why even bother adding in new things if you don't have to, right? If you're able to progress your lifts, why look to add new exercises? Why, if you end a meet, why look to add in a whole new block of training that looks nothing like the meet that produced so much success? Like with Paul's training, right? He's like, best I've ever felt, lightest the openers ever felt, no pain, no injuries. Like, why would you change your training up at all? Well, because it's the off season. That's what you're supposed to do. It's like, well, no. Why?
Well, that's not what I did.
I'm not saying that's what Paul did, but I'm saying in general, that's what happens, right? It's like, oh, after the meet, whole new training plan. It's like, why? Did your sport change? Are they having you do 10 rep front squats now for powerlifting meets? No, no.
It's so funny because even coming from the bodybuilding side, so like people ask all the time, like, oh yeah, how do you train post show, right? We're like, so I work with Justin, and Justin very much feeds you very quickly after a show, and the rebound is so much fun. You get really strong really fast, and people always ask, how do you manage your post show block? And I'm like, honestly, I do what I was doing into the show, but I do it better and I do it harder because my tissues are mostly prepared. I'm neurally accommodated to the movements. And I think that so often we change something for the sake of change, and whether it's bodybuilding or, any sort of endurance sport, like what you're doing, Tony, and granted, periodization endurance sports is a little bit different. But same thing with powerlifting. If we're not asking the question, why would we change? I don't know. I'm a huge believer that if we all just stopped and asked one more question, I think we'd make a lot fewer mistakes.
Yeah, it's very true. But yeah,
I'm going to throw a monkey wrench in here though. How many of our athletes that we coach are taking this so seriously that they are fine to chip away at the same, like I have a couple of athletes. They have literally done the same assistance work for 26 weeks in a row because everything's going up. So why would we change? And they're totally fine with it. That's like 5% of people that are okay with that. So how do we manage adherence within this context?
You think that if someone's squat, bench, and deadlift is going up, they give 2 fucks about their assistance work?
They absolutely do.
Then they're in the wrong sport.
Absolutely. But they don't do it because they want to be the best at their sport. They do it because it's fun.
Then that's fine. Then that's how you program for them. Then it doesn't really matter. And then if they're like, oh, my squat went up 50 pounds when we did it this way, and it only went up 5 pounds when we did it this way. It's like, you want it to have more fun. You want to have more fun. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be as strong as you can be.
Totally agree.
And you just manage those expectations, and you talk to that client about it, and you just let them know, like, hey, there's an optimal way to do things. And then there's a way that you want to do things that doesn't create boredom and makes it fun. But you pick the sport. That's the most boring sport in the world. Like,
you just bad.
You just gotta pay. You just gotta pay the price. If you want to be good at it, you have to squat, bench, and deadlift year round. Sorry. And if those movements are going up, you don't need to change anything.
I kind of disagree with that.
That's fine.
Yeah, no.
Tell us why.
If we were ever to fight, I'm just going to run the other direction. Well, I'm going to walk very quickly the other direction because I'm no longer athletic enough to really run anymore. Now,
but Tony can chase you. I will not.
You can just sit on the side of one of those many desserts.
I'll get in my really fast truck.
Yeah, there you go.
Exactly.
I think that there are a lot of ways to accomplish a very similar goal with a little bit of variability. Granted, if we're going to think about, an assistance movement with a particular goal, maybe it's quad strength. There may be a hierarchy of preferential movements to improve that pattern, or to improve that weak point, or, whatever it is that you're working on. And maybe there's one that's a little bit less optimal, but is actually fun. You're still going to be able to improve from that point. Are they going to get 100% of the results? No. Are they going to be able to get 80% and still enjoy it? Yeah. And for me, honestly, I'm happy with 80%. I think many of our clients probably are too.
As long as
I'm sure to let Dave know
that. as long as they're aware of what they're doing, and like that's the thing, right? It's like an athlete may say they want to do X, but then they want Y outcome. And then when they don't get Y outcome because they chose X, it's your job as a coach because you fucked up now as a coach. It's like, no, you chose to do this, right? You want to do conjugate because it's more fun, then fine, we'll do conjugate and we'll do it the best way we can. But trust me, if you just squat, bench, and deadlift all the time, you're going to get a lot stronger than you would do in conjugate because that's the sport, right? But for some reason, people just want to have fun, and that's just the way it is, and that's fine. But that's not the sport you chose. Who are the best in the world at what they do? And you look at guys like Bryce Lewis, John Hack. I don't think they're doing a lot of these GPP variation type stuff.
No, they're not trying to be cute with anything. It's really, can you maintain the neural acclimations, maintain efficiency, and maintain tissue structure and tissue integrity? Right. You can do those 3 things, you're going to progress, period, full stop.
Right. So you have people who are like, I want to be the next John Hack. It's like, no, you don't. You don't want to come to the gym and squat, bench, and deadlift, and that's all you ever do. It's like, you want to have fun. You want to do all this accessory work. You want to do a bodybuilding phase. You want to do this. It's like,
my favorite is when people think they're doing a bodybuilding phase when they do like 8 weeks of hypertrophy work. I'm like, no, not the same.
Not even hypertrophy work, like multiple sets of 6.
Yeah, or like
I'm doing bodybuilding work. I did 4 sets of 6 today.
I'm gonna get real big now. I did 2 sets of 10 on my squat. I'm like, yeah, and it was like RPE 6 only because your lungs gave out because you're so deconditioned. Like,
when people do like 3 sets of 5 and like volume PR, it's like, volume PR from what? Like, that's pathetic.
I remember like my first workout when I started training at the gym I'm training at now. So it's the first time I've had access to machines on a consistent basis in years. And I was like, I'm going to do a set to failure on the leg press. And I was like, 10 plates should do it. So I like worked my way up and I hit 10 plates for like 20 reps and I'm fucking dying, but the sled is still moving. And I got to 20. I'm like, this is stupid. I just racked it.
I think it's been the most fun thing to transition into this like really hard, like proximity to failure, like true muscular concentric failure, not technical failure, and bodybuilding, especially training with Dave. One, because my PT brain gets centered out like crazy and managing some of his variables too, but also because it's just so different from anything. And I think that if you've actually trained to concentric failure on something that feels soul crushing, rather than, you miss a lift because you miss groove by half an inch, it's such a different feeling. It's terrifying and awesome.
Yeah.
It's very scary.
But Paul, I got a question for you then, because for me, it's like when you watch people who compete in the USAPL, they seem perfectly fine with squat, benching, and deadlifting. But then all of a sudden you add drugs into the mix and it's like they don't want to do it anymore. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that USAPL lifters can squat, bench, and deadlift and be perfectly fine doing it year round, at least the good ones for the most part? And for me, I think it's because that's what the coaches and that's what the best athletes are telling everyone to do. Whereas like us on the performance enhancing side, we're like, drugs will take care of all the inefficiencies we have as programmers. So some of these programming gurus are fucking idiots and they don't know what they're doing. And then people are like, oh, but this person's doing this and they're doing that. So that'll be fun. Let me do that. Right. But you don't have that kind of pushback with USAPL coaches and lifters.
I think we're seeing a transition, right? Because you look at the two of the best lifters right now, Jamal and John, both SBD, high frequency, relatively lower volumes, heavy week after week, and they're making progress. And they're continuing to set all-time world records. I will say that I have personally transitioned more so to a higher frequency model. I think it works best. I think having more exposures to the competition lifts, it just, their patterns get better, movements get more efficient. There's less need to do all this mobility warm-up shit because you're always in those positions. There's just so many positives from that. And I've even transitioned. I have a few clients that are like, yeah, I want to train conjugate. I find it more fun. Well, little do they know that they have a little bit more movement variability, but they're still training a higher frequency model because I've just transitioned them over to that. And I've seen some fantastic results. I think that people try to validate the need for more variability, less frequency towards like the effects of the gear. It's like, oh, my output every session is higher, so I need more recovery. Okay, you still don't have world-class strength levels. That's not an excuse.
It isn't,
and it would never be an excuse anyway.
It's so stupid because the gear accelerates recovery.
It does accelerate recovery. It also slows the decay of fitness. So you hold your fitness longer,
right? Which
would be a reason why you might still be able to make progress with less frequency, right? Because you maintain fitness for a longer period of time. There are some considerations to be made for, higher outputs, more volume tolerance in some instances. But I used to fall into that camp. I used to be like, the DUP is stupid. It's beating up these athletes. The only reason it's working for them is because they're fucking small and have no muscle, but they're fucking strong. So why don't we look at what they're doing?
Yeah. But even then, right? Like the strongest big guys, they're doing the same stuff. They're just not doing it as often. Right?
That's exactly what I was going to say.
So you have Eric
just drops.
You have Eric Lillibridge and Dan Bell. They squat heavy once every other week. They're not trying to be like, oh, what can I do in my second week? Maybe I'll add a SSB tempo with chains. Like, no, they don't fucking do that. It's like, why would they do that?
They do a light squat and
why would they interfere with their ability to recover for their heavy squat? It's just, I don't know. For some reason, it's the only sport that I can think of where people are trying to get away from the actual thing that makes you better at the sport to get better at the sport. It's like, if you're in the NFL, I'm not going to tell you to go play baseball in your off season and expect you to come back ready to play football. It just doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't work.
I think there's been a lot of presentation of information in the glorification of assistance work, where I think there's been a huge trend to make things, again, sound very, very complex and sound like you need to be doing. I mean, we're of a generation where people believe that more is better in everything. And so I think that the way things have been presented over the years is that there's a purpose behind everything we do. And there is. But the purpose of actually improving main movement, squat, bench, deadlift gets lost within the purpose of, well, if I do a safety bar, it's going to have XYZ effect. And I think that's really what it comes down to. It's just the glorification of, quite frankly, more.
What I've found actually, like I consider myself very fortunate to be surrounded by and, you know, friends with a lot of really good coaches. And it constantly forces me to check myself when I think I have things, you know, figured out. You know, Tony and I, you and I speak every week. When I was living in Calgary, I was with Bryce Krawchuk every day. You know, he's doing great things. His coach, Mike Shear, has taught him a lot. You know, I train with Stu almost every day. Like, I'm surrounded, and I've been, you know, mentored by a bunch of great coaches. So I think for me, as long as I'm still learning and as long as I'm still adapting my process, I'm going to be okay with making some mistakes along the way. But I definitely now look at it as, you know, it's a sport. So we train a sport by playing the sport. The other stuff that we do is just to put us in a better position to play that sport. So for me, I do like more variety in my training. At the point that I'm at right now in my career, I'm going to place enjoyment over specificity because that's what's more important to me. But the last 6 to 8 weeks before, like say 6 weeks before competition, it's going to be specific. I'm going to squat, bench, and deadlift. And then I'm going to do the assistance work that puts me in a position where I can continue to squat, bench, and deadlift. And I think the more of my athletes that I've transitioned into that type of a model where we still do some stuff that's fun and that maybe chases a little bit of hypertrophy and that keeps them interested. But as we approach the meet prep, we periodize it in a way where as they're getting into a meet, frequency is higher. We're putting them in positions in our assistance work to keep those main lifts progressing in a predictable manner. The outcomes have been ridiculous. I had a kid, he had been with me for 2 years. We've done more of like a 2 squats, 1 deadlift, 2 benches kind of arrangement. And he said, I said, what do you think about training a bit higher frequency? This is a drug-free athlete. He put 130 pounds in his total in 12 weeks.
Jesus.
And we didn't do anything except increase his frequency. I was like, okay, this sold me on this.
Yeah.
I think when I've seen the biggest improvements in my own lifts, it's been in a high frequency program as well. And I think the hard thing about that a lot of coaches and athletes maybe need to take a good look at is volume and intensity with that, particularly volume. When I actually tore my adductor tendon, it was right after a high frequency phase where I was so efficient, I was super strong, but I hadn't looked at training volume and intensity enough to where my obviously tendons were just under recovered, for lack of a better word. And I think that a lot of people go through this DUP model and they end up either really, really strong or they end up really, really hurt. And it comes down to having, I think, in my opinion, mechanics and technique in place. And if you don't have those two things at least locked into where you can safely assume that stress is being distributed as it needs to be over specific tissues, that needs to be, taken care of.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest issue that comes about with that is managing volume when it comes to the main movements, right? It's like people chase hypertrophy and squat, bench, and deadlift, and they're doing 4 sets of 10. And it's like, that's a recipe for disaster because you're getting so far removed from your actual sport and your actual ability to perform the movements efficiently. And it's just no point. Like, I just don't get it. I don't get the idea that you're chasing hypertrophy to get stronger. It's like, if you just did singles and doubles, I'm pretty sure you'd get strong, pretty sure you get very, very strong, right? There's guys who are way smaller than some of these 275ers and they're getting out totaled. So obviously it's not clearly all muscle based and hypertrophy driven, right? Yeah. So I think that's where a lot of the issue comes in is people chase hypertrophy in their off season instead of just chasing getting stronger because they think that if by getting bigger, they're going to get stronger. And it's just not for me, I haven't seen that to be the case with any lifter.
No, there's a reason that if you look at a lot of these power lifters and they try to transition to a sport like bodybuilding, oftentimes where they're lagging especially for men, is legs. I don't think that's any coincidence at all.
Yeah.
No. So there's two things I want to hit on. So Tony mentioned like 4 sets of 10 on a squat. I think for coaches, when you're programming, a really important thing to remember is why you're doing specific movements. So if you're implementing a competition movement, that is your sport. So you wouldn't play soccer with a heavy ball, right? You would play soccer with a soccer ball, and you would do drills that directly correlate to soccer. So if you're going to squat, you're going to squat, and you're going to squat for a neurological adaptation. If you want to chase hypertrophy, do it on something that is not a squat, right? Is externally stabilized, is safer, is, not skill dependent, right? It doesn't necessarily answer the question of, do you need to be bigger to be stronger? Being bigger would improve your leverages, especially as, if you jump like 2 weight classes or something like that, but not many people are going to go ahead and do that.
I hate when people say that, because who does that? Who jumps 2 weight classes of pure muscle to improve their leverages? Name one power lifter who's improved their leverages because they got so big muscularly. Name one. Can't. Doesn't exist. Just doesn't exist. The best people who chase hypertrophy for their living on all kinds of drugs with the best genetics maybe put on 5 pounds of muscle a year. Maybe. Yeah. You think a power lifter who's not doing that full time, doesn't have the greatest genetics, is going to be fucking so much muscle that their leverages are going to change? No, it doesn't exist. It doesn't happen. Can we just erase that from the powerlifting coach vernacular of like, oh, increase your leverages, do this? Show me one person. They're doing an 8-week hypertrophy block. How much muscle are they putting on, Paul?
All right.
4 grams.
Babe, make me a cake, please.
Maybe.
That's one of the statistics of working with Justin has always kind of blown my mind when he talks about the actual rate of muscle growth and how
crazy
slow it actually is.
Yeah.
And just translating that over to powerlifting too is just, does more mass ultimately move more mass in very simplistic reductionist forms? If you're comparing someone who is big versus someone who trains purely for neurological adaptation, I'm going to bet on the guy with purely neurological adaptation for maximum strength.
Yeah, thank you.
For strength expression. However, if we're talking like in general, obviously someone who's bigger is probably going to lift more weight than the average guy or gal who's smaller. Unless, again, that other person is trained for neurological adaptation.
Right. That's correlational though. That's not necessarily causational. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Bring, you better step to us with some better stuff on that, Danny. Come on. The other piece that I wanted to touch on, Danny mentioned like volume and intensity. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of the time when people don't have experience programming in a higher frequency model, what happens is like, say you're squatting 4 times a week. It's a very extreme example, but squatting 4 times a week. What they'll do is they'll progress all of those squats up at the same time. And then you get into the situation where you're squatting heavy 4 times a week. You might be able to recover from that maybe for a couple of weeks, but it's not going to be something that's sustainable. So you have to understand, as volume comes up, or as intensity comes up, volume would need to come down. And frequency is a manipulation of volume because it adds a set or a rep or whatever every time you head into the gym. So understanding that there is a kind of happy spot where maybe you have the ability to squat heavy once a week if the rest of those 3 squats are more moderate, or maybe one is lighter. And lighter doesn't necessarily need to be easy, right? It could just be a decrease in absolute intensity, right? Manipulating absolute intensity and relative intensity is also very important within that model. But you need to keep really good inventory of how hard this athlete's working, how much work are they doing, and then looking at the trends over time to see like, hey, are things trending up the way we want them to? And when I say things, I mean the competition lifts, the only lifts that actually fucking matter, right? If your safety bar is going down and your output on that's going down, but every Saturday when you go to squat, your squat's going up, something's happening. Something good is happening. That's probably would never happen, but
yeah.
Say never though.
I mean, it's the idea that the more is better approach, right? Like if you're increasing your frequency and you're like, oh, I'm going to squat 4 days a week, right? It's like, but I can't figure out what the other 2 days are going to be like. It's like, well, don't fucking put them in your program then.
Yeah.
Like if you have to be like, oh, I got to squat at 50% because it beats me up if I go any higher, then don't squat at 50. Like if people talk about junk volume in bodybuilding, junk volume in powerlifting is
it's totally a thing.
It'll be so detrimental too. Even if you look at RFD and some of the neurological adaptations, where if you're moving lightweight way too slow, that's not a good thing either.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I should put in my questionnaire from now on, be like, do you want to be the best powerlifter or do you want to have fun? And if you want to have fun, get a different fucking hobby outside of the gym to where you can go to the gym, train for an hour and then leave and still be satisfied because you just sweat. Like, I just don't get it. Like, do powerlifters not have hobbies? They want to go to the gym to have fun instead of getting better?
No,
it's
they
like, pick up a hobby outside of the gym.
Elite powerlifter in their fucking Instagram bio, and that's everything that they are in their whole fucking lives.
This is so funny because I feel like I've been so far removed from powerlifting for a while that like
good. Stay there. Don't come back.
But like coming back to it is just such an interesting thing to me because I live with someone and I'm married to someone who's so process oriented that like he gets to, you know, before a meet and he almost doesn't even care about the meet. He just wants to get back to training. And to me, for the longest time, that was so foreign because I'm such a performer. I mean, you put me on a stage or you put me on a platform and I'm like, fucking go, like, let's do this. And it's just so interesting to me to come back to the idea that some people really just care about either purely performance, meaning like they'll do whatever they're told if it means their squat, bench, deadlift goes up at the expense of actually enjoying the dang thing. Or, you know, the total other end of the spectrum is the guy I live with. You know, I almost forget about how many people do or don't care about maximum performance, which sounds stupid to say, like it's what we do, right? Like we coach people, but I just so infrequently talk to people who really only care about one thing.
Well, there's a third class and there's the person that only cares about being called a powerlifter.
There's that too.
Calling themselves a powerlifter.
There's that.
If a coach told me, it was like, hey, you're going to go to the gym and you're going to spend 30 minutes in there and you're just going to work up to a heavy squat and you'll get really strong. We're going to do that every other day. And that's the program. Like, fucking sweet. That means I have so much more time for other stuff outside of the gym. Sign me up for that. Not like, oh, can we get a more complicated program? Because I'd really love spending 3 hours.
You're so soft. You got so soft in your old age, man.
It's not a soft thing. But yeah, I don't get it. I don't get it either. I just, the fact that like you're going to pick a sport and the main goal is not to be better at it just doesn't really sit well with me. I don't know.
But that's so interesting. I mean, even before we got on the podcast, Tony, it was so fun to talk to you about everything you're doing now with the endurance training and talking about expectation management and how so much of that has evolved, because it's like Coach Tony, like powerlifting Coach Tony and athlete Tony, where he is right now, they just seem so different. Help me fill in the gap.
Well, I want to get better at what I'm doing. I want to compete. And for me, if like I just did a duathlon and took second place, I was pissed that I got beat by the guy because he caught me on the run and he beat me. So I want to get better. I'm not doing stuff in my life, but it's also a hobby too. It's not something that I want to be the best at because those days have already passed me by, right? If I want to be the best at something, then I have to be dedicated to it for X amount of time. So the fact that it's just something that I'm doing for fun, that's where the expectation kind of diminishes the ability to always want to do things that are going to revolve around performing at a high level, right? So, but everything I do still evolves around me trying to get better at it. It just, I know that it's going to be a slower process if I'm doing other things as well. But because it's something I do for fun, then that's perfectly fine. But if it's something that I would say that I do at a competitive level, then I would do whatever it takes to be the best competitively. And that's why that's one of the biggest things when I jump into these sports. It's like, I just have to pull myself back and be like, hey, you know, the guys that have been doing jujitsu since they were 10, you'll never catch them. So don't make jujitsu your life. Don't make running your life, right? If those are the things, if it doesn't bring enjoyment and fulfillment in my life, then I just don't do it anymore. And I know that's going to slow down and delay the process of getting better at it. But that's fine where I'm at right now. But when I was powerlifting, it was like, I was just trying to be the best. I did everything I could. I turned over every stone. And then when I'm done, I can be like, oh, I'm done. Like I tried everything. I didn't deviate from the plan. I didn't do things just because they were fun. I didn't go to the gym and be like, oh, I don't want to squat today. I'm going to do something more fun. It's like, no, I did exactly what I had to do. And when I'm done, I'm like, I'm done. I pushed my body to the limit. I don't have any regrets. I don't have anything that I wish I would have done differently. And I hit the total that I wanted to hit twice. And I was like, I'm good with it. Where so many people have a hard time quitting powerlifting and they're still powerlifting and trying to be relevant in their 40s and 50s. And it's like, that's because you didn't take it seriously for 10 years. You're just chasing something. And that's typically what it is when people have regrets, and it's because they didn't put out when they were supposed to, right? A lot of people in the military who get out of the military and they're like, oh man, I wish I could go back in and do this and do that. And it's like, you had your chance, right?
Yeah.
You know, when I'm out doing stuff, I'm giving it everything that I have, for sure. I'm not out there not trying to perform at a high level, but it doesn't dictate the things and the choices I have in my life anymore, because, you know, that's where school and that's where business and all that other stuff comes into play that dictates a lot of my life choices now.
That's just so interesting, because I feel like the three of us have been in a very, very high level of powerlifting, you know, at some point. And I think we all have a little bit of different perspective. Like Paul, I love that you're still out there competing and still putting up big totals. And you're like, I want to out squat Jeremy, or, you know, you've got some kind of thing that you're chasing almost at any point. And I love that.
But
And
I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm still balancing. Like, I still want to do those things, but my mindset is much more like Tony's right now.
totally.
Like, powerlifting is just something that I do. It's something that I still enjoy, but I'm not sacrificing other shit in my life to be better at powerlifting anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what I put into powerlifting and trying to be the strongest is now what I put into health and trying to be the healthiest, right? So that's what my goal is. That's what I'm 100% doing now. It's like trying to be as healthy as I can to live as long as possible with a high quality of life. That's my new goal. So it would be deleterious of me to be like, yeah, I'm going to do that. Then I'm still going to take a bunch of drugs though, because I want to look a certain way and I'm still going to try to keep as much. It's like, no, that would be stupid. That goes against every health goal that I have. So that's kind of the things. Health is like happiness, longevity, you know, cardiovascular health. Like those are the things that I focus on as far as full spectrum goes. So that's why it's easy for me to make those choices in my life. Like I couldn't imagine being 40 years old, pushing gear, chasing a total that doesn't mean anything when all these people are dying left and right. It's like eventually you got to choose health and longevity. And it was an easy choice for me because I gave being strong everything that I had. And now I'm going to give health everything that I have. And it just seems it's just a much more like everything's enjoyable when you're giving it everything you have. For me, I don't want to look back and be like, man, I really like just sandbag this. And, you know, you only have one life to live. It's going to get full throttle throughout, but the perspective is going to change on what you're chasing, right? I'm chasing education and longevity and health. And that's what's given. And that may look like fun runs and enjoyment, but like that's part of living a longer life is enjoying it, right?
I love the fire that you have in you when you're talking about these things and these different goals that you have. I always think it's interesting just as a coach to be talking with other athletes, you know, to our athletes or to other coaches about how those things shift, because inevitably some of the athletes that we coach are going to have that same shift or a similar type of shift to the one that the three of us have had. We're like, obviously we want to continue to be better at the thing that we do, but it's not the thing that we do anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Life becomes a thing eventually. And
Right.
if you're not passionate about that, then it's like, I don't know.
I mean, isn't that what this is all for anyway?
I think so.
Learning how to love things that we do. And I think there's something to be said where when you feel a fire towards one thing, whether it's powerlifting or anything else that you really want to be great at, when you figure out what that feels like, man, it's so easy to take that and put it elsewhere.
Yeah, 100%.
Totally.
Anything else, Paul?
No, I'm good. I'm good.
All right. I feel like we had Dani on and we didn't even like talk to her about what she is
I think
the best at, right? But it's good. It was a good conversation for sure. That's what happens when I let you lead the conversation though.
You know what? You bring it home then, man. You end it. Bookend it.
You guys are like Thelma and Louise over here, Laverne and Shirley. I mean, it's something special is what it is.
It's very special.
And Shirley.
That you just named two references that probably 90% of the audience will not get, but that's fine. We understand.
That make us old?
Oh my God.
Yeah, we're old.
I have to share this.
Oh God, here he goes being old man excited.
My lovely girlfriend is 26 years old, has never seen Bad Boys.
None of them?
None of them.
You're missing out on life.
I almost left her.
I've never seen Bad Boys.
You've never seen any of the Bad Boys?
Shut your mouth.
I've seen Kung Fu Panda. That's important, right?
No.
And the podcast.
Not the same.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So.
Well, I appreciate you guys having me on here today. If there's any time you want to chat about other things, let me know. I'm around. Very much love being able to talk to you both.
Same, likewise. And if people want to get a hold of you for any type of coaching and rehab stuff, is that what you offer, or do you just?
I do a little of everything right now. I was actually just talking to Paul about this the other day. As much as people kind of say, jack of all trades, master of none, I feel like my strength is that truly I'm kind of a jack of all trades. But I do coaching for powerlifting, for hybrid powerlifting, bodybuilding, for people who are okay not being the best at the things they do. And I also do remote rehab, or kind of fill in the gaps from when people have been working with a PT in person and want to transition to training and need that gap filled.
Perfect. And if people want to get a hold of you for that, how can they do that?
They can email me, and my email is danny@mergeperformancept.com.
Perfect. And what's your Instagram?
Dani LaMartina, DPT.
There you go. All right, Danny, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Great to talk to you both.